Elon Musk poses as a homeless veteran at a military event. The general's response leaves him in tears. The cold morning air carried the sound of marching boots, distant voices, and the hum of military vehicles lined up in perfect formation. Soldiers moved in coordinated precision, their uniforms crisp, their boots polished to a mirror shine. Banners flapped in the wind, proudly displaying unit insignias and symbols of service. It was a day of celebration, a military appreciation event meant to honor veterans and active duty soldiers alike. But nobody paid attention to the man sitting on the sidewalk just outside the event perimeter. He looked out of place. His clothes were ragged, frayed at the edges, his once black t-shirt now a faded gray, stretched and worn thin. His jeans were torn, his shoes scuffed and barely holding together. A tattered army jacket hung loosely from his shoulders, a patch on the sleeve barely visible under layers of dirt and time. His hair was disheveled, his beard uneven, and his eyes, sharp yet weary, studied the scene in front of him with quiet intensity. No one knew who he was. No one recognized him. And that was exactly the point. Elon Musk adjusted his sleeve, hunching forward slightly to complete the illusion. He had spent the past week carefully crafting his disguise, studying the mannerisms of homeless veterans, learning how they moved, how they spoke, how they were treated by society. He wanted to see it for himself, not from the lens of a billionaire reading statistics, but from the ground level, where the truth wasn't softened by PR filters and polished speeches. And now, as he sat there, watching the world move around him, he saw the truth firsthand. A group of young soldiers walked past, their voices loud, their energy high. One of them, a fresh-faced recruit with a buzz cut and an air of arrogance, glanced at Elon and smirked. "Man, look at this guy. Bet he's just here for a free handout." His friend chuckled. "Probably some washed-up drunk. Should have made better choices." Elon said nothing. He didn't react. He just watched. The young soldier sneered. "What? You waiting for someone to give you a medal? Hate to break it to you, old man, but the military doesn't hand them out to people who couldn't cut it." His friend elbowed him. "Dude, Jill?" "Nah, I'm just saying," the soldier continued, his voice laced with mockery. "You can always tell the ones who gave up. The ones who didn't have what it takes." Elon finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You have no idea what you're talking about?" The soldier scoffed. "Oh yeah? And what would you know?" Elon locked eyes with him, the intensity behind his gaze stopping the soldier mid-smirk. For a brief moment, the arrogance wavered, replaced by something uncertain. But before anything else could be said, another voice cut through the tension. "Private," a deep, authoritative voice called out. The young soldier snapped to attention immediately, all bravado vanishing as a high-ranking general approached. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with ribbons and medals, the weight of decades of service evident in the way he carried himself. His sharp eyes took in the scene before him, the young soldier standing stiffly, Elon still seated on the sidewalk, and the undeniable tension lingering in the air. "Is there a problem here?" the general asked. The soldier shook his head quickly. "No, sir." The general didn't look convinced. His gaze shifted to Elon, studying him for a long moment. Unlike the others, he didn't immediately dismiss him. He didn't sneer, didn't look away. Instead, something flickered in his expression, recognition or maybe understanding. Elon remained silent, waiting. The general took a step closer. "What's your name, soldier?" Elon hesitated for only a fraction of a second before responding, keeping his voice even. "Does it matter?" The general's lips pressed together in a firm line. "It does to me." Elon exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Elliot. Elliot Marsh." The general studied him again. Then, to Elon's surprise, he extended a hand. Elon hesitated. This was not the reaction he had expected. Slowly, he reached out and clasped the general's hand. It was a firm shake, one that conveyed not just strength but respect. Real respect. "You served," the general said, more statement than question. Elon nodded. "A long time ago." The general's eyes darkened slightly, as if piecing something together. "And now?" Elon shrugged, playing the part. "Just getting by." The general was silent for a moment, then said something that caught Elon completely off guard. Thank you for your service. Elon blinked. He had expected pity, maybe skepticism, but not this. Not the raw sincerity in the general's voice, not the weight behind those words. Before he could respond, the general turned to the young soldier. Private, do you know what the hardest battles are? The soldier swallowed. Sir? The general's gaze was unyielding. The ones fought after the war is over. The young soldier shifted uncomfortably. But I didn't mean any disrespect, sir. Didn't you? The general's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You think a uniform is what makes a soldier? That once it comes off, the man wearing it stops existing? The young soldier had no response. The general looked back at Elon, nodding once before stepping aside. Come with me. Elon hesitated for a split second before pushing himself up from the sidewalk. His body still played the part, slightly stiff, slightly unsteady, but his mind was racing. This was not going how he expected. The general led him past the main gates, past groups of soldiers who threw curious glances but said nothing. They stopped near a quiet corner of the event space, away from the main crowd. The general turned to face him fully. You're not who you say you are, he said. Elon felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean? The general smirked. Your posture, your eyes, the way you measured every response. You're not just some nameless veteran trying to get by. You're here for a reason. Elon exhaled through his nose, considering his next move carefully. Finally, he reached up and pulled the tattered jacket off his shoulders. Then, he ran a hand through his messy hair, straightening slightly, the weight of the disguise slipping away. Recognition dawned in the general's eyes almost instantly. His breath hitched just slightly, his composed demeanor faltering for the first time. You're Elon Musk. Elon nodded. Yeah. For a long moment, the general said nothing. Then, to Elon's absolute shock, his eyes glistened. Why? The general asked, his voice softer now. Why do this? Elon took a deep breath. Because I wanted to see it for myself. The way veterans are treated. The way they struggle after giving everything. I wanted to understand, not just from reports and numbers, but from reality. The general swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Elon continued, his voice steady. And now that I've seen it, I'm going to do something about it. The general exhaled, blinking rapidly as he reached out, gripping Elon's shoulder. His voice was thick with emotion. You have no idea how much that means. Elon held his gaze. Then let's start changing things. The general nodded, his grip tightening just slightly before letting go. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a military event, surrounded by soldiers who had no idea what had just happened, Elon Musk and the decorated general shared an understanding, one that didn't need words. One that would change everything. The weight of the moment settled between them like an unspoken pact. The general, a man who had seen more battles than most would ever understand, stood motionless, his eyes still locked on Elon. The reveal had left him stunned, but not in the way Elon had expected. There was no anger, no betrayal, just something raw, something deeply personal. Elon had expected pushback. He had expected the general to demand an explanation, to question his motives, maybe even reprimand him for deceiving the soldiers. Instead, the older man just let out a slow, measured breath and gave a small nod. I should have known, the general muttered, shaking his head with a tired chuckle. Elon tilted his head slightly. How's that? The general crossed his arms. The way you carried yourself. You're good at blending in, I'll give you that. But there are things you can't fake, things only a man who's spent time studying people would understand. Elon nodded. That was the point. The general studied him again, this time with curiosity rather than suspicion. And what exactly is your point, Mr. Musk? Elon exhaled. I wanted to see it for myself. The real struggles. The real reactions. Not the sugar-coated version, not the statistics on a report. I needed to feel it, to know what it's like to be invisible. The general's expression darkened. And now that you have? Elon didn't hesitate. Now I fix it? The general let out a small laugh, but there was no amusement in it. That's quite the claim. Elon met his gaze, unwavering. It's not a claim. It's a promise. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the event buzzed around them, soldiers laughing, orders being given, the distant hum of military vehicles, but in their small corner, it was just the two of them. Then, finally, the general sighed and motioned for Elon to follow. "Walk with me." Elon fell into step beside him, the two of them moving through the event as if nothing had happened. No one questioned them. No one even looked twice. The general's presence was enough to ensure that. As they walked, the general spoke, his voice quieter now. "You want to help veterans, Mr. Musk? Then understand this. Money isn't enough. Donations, handouts, temporary fixes? They don't work. You want to really change something, you have to start from the ground up." Elon nodded. "Agreed. So where do we start?" The general stopped in front of a memorial wall, his eyes scanning the names etched into the stone. "With the ones who come home and realize they don't know where they belong anymore." Elon followed his gaze, the weight of the statement settling in his chest. The general continued. "You saw it yourself today. The way some of these younger soldiers treated you. They don't understand, because no one teaches them what happens after. They're trained to fight, to survive in war, but no one prepares them for what comes next." Elon exhaled. "Reintegration?" The general nodded. "It's the hardest battle of all." Elon let the words sink in, his mind already racing through possibilities, solutions, ways to apply everything he had learned. "What if we change that?" The general raised a brow. "How?" Elon turned to him, his expression set with determination. "Training. Not just for war but for life after. A structured transition program, one that doesn't just offer resources but integrates them into the military from day one. Financial literacy, career training, psychological support. Make it as mandatory as basic training itself." The general stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's not a bad idea." "It's not just an idea," Elon said. "I can fund it. I can build it. But I need the right people to implement it." The general smirked. "And you think I'm the right person?" Elon gave him a knowing look. "I think you're exactly the person." The general huffed out a laugh, shaking his head. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Time is the one thing we can't get back," Elon said simply. The general was silent for a moment, then extended his hand again. This time, there was no hesitation. No act. Elon shook it firmly. "All right, Mr. Musk," the general said. "Let's change the system." Elon nodded. "What?" The handshake lingered for a second longer, as if sealing a deal that neither of them fully understood yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just another billionaire's PR stunt. This wasn't about optics or reputation. This was real. And it was just the beginning. The deal was set, but Elon knew that talk was cheap. If there was one thing he had learned in his career, it was that ideas meant nothing without execution. And this was bigger than any company launch, bigger than any rocket launch, bigger than anything he had ever taken on before. This wasn't about business. This was about people, real people who had been forgotten by the very system they had sworn to serve. The general led him further into the event, their conversations still hushed but charged with purpose. Around them, soldiers laughed, saluted one another, and swapped stories over coffee and catered meals. Some were old, their uniforms a little tighter, their hair a little thinner, their backs not as straight as they once had been. Others were young, full of the kind of confidence that only came before the reality of war had sunk in. And then there were the quiet ones, the ones standing on the outskirts, their hands in their pockets, their eyes scanning the crowd like they weren't sure if they still belonged here. Those were the ones Elon was here for. The general stopped near a group of men sitting at a folding table. They weren't in uniform, but they carried themselves like soldiers. Something about the way they sat, the way they moved, the way their eyes flicked up at Elon and then back down like they had already made their judgment. Veterans. The ones who had come back, but never really found their way home. "Gentlemen," the general greeted. "Mind if we join you?" One of the men, a burly guy with a thick gray beard and a scar running down the side of his cheek, shrugged. "Free country." Elon sat down, mimicking their relaxed posture, though he could feel their eyes assessing him. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. "You military?" one of them asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Elon shook his head. "No. But I should have been." The men exchanged glances. It wasn't the answer they expected. The bearded man leaned forward. Then why are you here? Elon met his gaze, unwavering. Because I want to know what happens after. Silence. A heavy one. The kind that only comes when you ask a question that people don't like to answer. The bearded man exhaled, shaking his head. You want to know what happens after? I'll tell you. You come back and suddenly, you're not needed anymore. 1 minute, you're trained to survive in places most people wouldn't last a day, and the next? You're expected to flip burgers like it never happened. Another man, lean and wiry with deep lines carved into his face, nodded. They give you some benefits. Some medical care. But the system's clogged. Underfunded. Half of us get lost in the cracks. The youngest among them, a guy who looked like he couldn't be older than 30, scoffed. And if you can't adjust? If your head isn't right? You're on your own. You drink. You spiral. And before you know it, you're one of them. He gestured toward the parking lot, where a few homeless men lingered near the fences. Elon listened, absorbing every word. People say they care, the bearded man continued. They thank us for our service. But it's just words. You want to really help? Do something about it? Elon nodded. That's why I'm here. The younger one scoffed. Yeah? And what exactly are you gonna do? Elon took a deep breath. Build. The table fell silent again. Build what? The bearded man asked cautiously. A new system, Elon said. One that doesn't forget you the second you take off the uniform. The men exchanged skeptical glances. How? The wiry man asked. Elon leaned forward. By treating veterans the way we treat astronauts. When an astronaut comes back from space, they don't just get dropped off and told, good luck adjusting to gravity. They go through re-entry training. They get monitored, supported, because coming back is just as dangerous as leaving. The men were listening now. Really listening. Why don't we do the same for soldiers? Elon continued. Why isn't reintegration a process? Why isn't it structured? We train you for war, but we don't train you for after war. That's where I start. The bearded man rubbed his jaw, considering. And you really think you can pull this off? Elon smirked. I've landed rockets. Reinventing veteran care seems like the easier problem. For the first time, one of the men chuckled. Just barely, but it was there. The general, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. He's serious. The bearded man looked between them, exhaling deeply. You've got my attention, Musk. But words are cheap. Show us something real. Elon nodded. You will. And he meant it. This wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't some billionaire vanity project. This was real. Because after everything he had seen today, after everything he had heard, Elon Musk wasn't just going to walk away. He was going to build something that would last. Something that would change lives. Something that would finally, truly, bring soldiers home. The general leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as he studied Elon carefully. There was a weight to his gaze, the kind that only came from years of experience, from seeing men with big promises and empty follow-through. But Elon wasn't one of them. He had never been the type to make claims without backing them up. You're really serious about this, the general finally said, almost as if testing him. Elon nodded. I don't do half measures. The bearded veteran across from him tapped his fingers against the table, his skepticism still evident. All right, let's say you do build something. What makes you think the government's going to let you change a system that's been broken for decades? Elon smirked. Because I'm not asking for permission. A few of the men exchanged amused glances. The younger one, the one who had seemed the most cynical before, raised a brow. That's bold. It's necessary, Elon countered. The bureaucracy is too slow. If I wait for the government to approve change, another decade will pass, and more veterans will end up homeless, jobless, or worse. So I won't wait. I'll do what I always do. I'll build outside of the system and make them realize they have no choice but to follow. The general let out a low chuckle. And what exactly is step 1 in this grand plan of yours? Elon didn't hesitate. Employment. You all said it yourselves. Veterans come back and don't know where they belong. So let's give them a place. The bearded veteran leaned forward. Go on. Jobs, training, real career opportunities, Elon explained. Not just any jobs, either. The same way I build the best engineers, I want to build the best veteran workforce. Whether it's in aerospace, AI, renewable energy, logistics, there's an entire untapped talent pool in you guys, and no one's putting it to use. The wiry man finally spoke again, his voice quieter. You're talking about giving us purpose again. Elon nodded. Exactly. The general exhaled, rubbing his chin. I'll admit that's not a bad angle. But you're talking about a massive infrastructure shift. Training, integration, mental health support. This isn't just hiring people, it's rewiring an entire system. Elon smirked. I love rewiring systems. The younger vet scoffed but shook his head with something close to admiration. You're crazy. Maybe, Elon said. But crazy is what changes the world. The bearded man finally exhaled, leaning back in his chair. I must say we believe you. Say we want to believe you. What happens next? Elon steepled his fingers, his mind already calculating the next steps. I start by proving it works. A pilot program. A facility where veterans can train, integrate into careers, and transition into a stable life, with housing, mentorship, everything they need to succeed. No handouts, no pity, just opportunity. The general nodded slowly. And you're funding this yourself? Every cent, Elon confirmed. I'll build the first one within 6 months. The bearded man let out a slow whistle. You don't waste time, huh? Time is a luxury too many don't have, Elon said. The longer we wait, the more lives get lost in the cracks. The wiry man exhaled. And if it works? Elon's eyes darkened with resolve. Then we expand. Nationwide. Globally if we have to. Silence settled over the table. The veterans exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Finally, the bearded man stood up and extended his hand. You make this happen, Musk. You've got my full support? Elon stood, shaking his hand firmly. Then let's make history. The general clapped him on the shoulder, nodding. You've got something here, Musk. Just don't let it turn into another empty promise. Elon smirked. I never do. And just like that, the first step was taken. A new mission, a new purpose, and a promise that would change lives forever.